Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another Downfield Read podcast here, Fantasy Football Friday. This is week 8, getting into the NFL season. If you are like me, I'm 4-3 in both my divisions, and I'm seeing a lot of teams out there that are 3-4. But before we get into that, let's get into Mr. Shawn Pettinati. How are we doing today, Shawn?
Good. How you doing, Jeff?
Doing well. How's your week been going?
Pretty good. Just busy doing our fantasy football, and then actually wrote up. I was talking to you, before we went live. Did a piece on betting preview on the World Series Game 1. Goes tonight. The Fall Classic starts up in LA. I just saw a thing. They have like 5 major events in LA tonight. I saw on Twitter. So the traffic's gonna be a nightmare. Obviously, it must be Clippers and Lakers. Something going on out there, and then obviously World Series Game 1. So yeah, it should be fun out there tonight.
Yeah. Who do you got World Series wise?
Rolled with the Yankees Game 1. Not because I'm a homer, but sharps are on the Yankees. I saw some sharp movement on the Yankees. They came down quite a bit on the money, a little bit, and so I'm gonna roll. I just like Cole. Cole, just better pitcher right now than Flaherty. Flaherty's carrying like a 7 ERA in the playoffs, and he's a righty. The Yankees do pretty well against righties. So
yeah. Well, I'm a small town baseball guy from Minnesota. I still have my roots with the Twins. They never did me wrong when I was growing up, so I got to catch 2 World Series in 87 and 91.
One of the best I've ever seen right there with Frank Viola and Burt Blyleven.
You got it, man.
Jack Morris.
So I like the small market teams. I always cheer for the small market. So myself, I'm not real interested in this World Series this year. I always like to have one smaller team. I'd like to see the Brewers in there. I'd like to see – there's always some small market. I'd like to see Oakland in there. I know that they're, a small market club, but so LA and New York, I'll be watching.
It's got to be a ratings bonanza tonight. I mean, even Mets Yankees Subway would have been great, but they got both coasts going, so they hit a jackpot with this one, I would think. So.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 very big markets, and you got to have. Why am I blanking on Shohei Ohtani?
Ohtani and Judge, they're 2 big stars too.
Yep. So probably the biggest names in baseball right now.
Absolutely.
So you got to have those guys in there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, how's your fantasy football going? How'd you make out on your waivers and stuff?
Did okay. Did pretty well overall. I got a couple teams at 3-4 in our fantasy turf war. I'm coming back from the 0-3 start. I'm at 3-4. So
nice.
Making a little run there. Overall, most of my teams are doing well. Waivers did okay. I'm not in too big a jam because we talked about on here. Most of the time, I'm a 1 quarterback, 1 tight end guy, unless I'm forced by roster restriction to have a second one. So I got some depth. Deontay Johnson's out in 1 league, but I got Tank Bigsby. I got Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks on the bench, so I was able to slot in actually Biggs.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
So but. If you carry multiple tight ends and multiple quarterbacks, those guys aren't on your roster. So that's why I preach that. I just, it's a risk, of course, but I was able to find Bo Nix and Tua Tagovailoa and fantasy turf war on the waivers, and I obviously cut. I drafted Watson, didn't work out, but I'm okay now with those 2 guys. So
yeah, and that's the kind of thing that you got to look out for. And I'm actually with you on that one. I've only got 1 tight end. My tight end is Brock Bowers, luckily, and my quarterback is Joe Burrow. So I got kind of lucky.
Those are easy ones. You don't need anything else.
And I'm never gonna play another one unless their buys come up, which is later on here, maybe week 10 and week 14, I think it is. So
you'll worry about that. You'll worry about it then.
Oh, for sure, because at that point in time, I've got backup running backs on my bench. Mm-hmm. Like I've got Damian backing up, Mixon right now, but it didn't look like he was going to play that much. If I get another week like that, I might drop him and try to pick up another backup running back or somebody who I think has more potential. I ended up getting Tillman off the waivers. I was like number 12 overall or something on the waivers. I've won my last, I think 3 games. I started off pretty poor with injuries and stuff. I was 1-2, and now I've won my last 3. So I'm always down there on the waivers. But I was able to pick up Tillman for this week just in case. I've got Debo, who's questionable, or who I saw was questionable still.
Yeah.
And then
it looks like he's going to go because he's been getting in limited, so that's good. I think he was spotted at practice yesterday, and he's limited 2 days in a row, so you should be good with him.
Yeah, and then I've got Kelvin Ridley, who returned to practice today, and you would think that he should be getting a few more looks at least with D-Hop being gone now this week.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
But we'll see how that pans out.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get right into it. We've got a couple minutes in. No questions as of yet. So bring those questions on as soon as you got them here. But let's go ahead and get into quarterbacks. And Shawn, if you want to go ahead and take this one first, be my guest.
Yeah. And then as I tell everybody, I'm going more from the DFS side, so I might not give you the obvious chalk, but I got 2 highlights. Well, my one highlight for quarterback start was Jalen Hurts. I like Hurts a lot this week. I like the Eagles to actually beat the Bengals, so they're a little bit of an underdog, so I kind of like that play. I like Hurts' floor because of the rushing ability. He's got 3 rushing touchdowns last 3 games. He's only QB 21, but has been QB 11 for last week at 22.3 points. So, I think he might go lesser owned because all the top quarterbacks are available, as you pointed out on our Tuesday show. No buys this week, so he could go under the radar. For my one spotlight sit, I had Drake May. Obviously, you and I talked about on Tuesday, he's gotten off to a great start, but I like him more as a QB2 this week. The Jets defense is 4th in points allowed to the position and 2nd against the pass. We expect them to bounce back here in a division foe after last week. They kind of laid an egg against the Steelers. We obviously like May as a talent. You and I talked about that Tuesday, but this week I had him as a sit. And then a couple more starts at quarterback. I like Prescott this week. The bounce back. They've been sitting on that bad, hearing about it for 2 weeks. I like the Cowboys this week again on the wagering side. I talked about that in some of my articles this week. Love Caleb Williams in a good spot. He's trending up. Kirk Cousins, obviously. And then sits. These aren't earth-shattering sits, but I'm out on Rattler and Herbert. Herbert would be more maybe. Those are the 2 that I have sits for at the quarterback position.
Wow, there you go. I think this is the first week that we've been doing this where we're not going to have exactly the same answers. How about that?
That's good.
My must starts. My first one is Brock Purdy. And I do like Dak Prescott, what you're saying there. Coming off the bye.
I like Purdy as well.
But yeah, I like Brock Purdy this week. He's 7th in fantasy football overall, and I'm going to talk about more of the long-term stuff. He's 7th in fantasy football overall versus Dallas, who gives up the 9th most total yards per game, 2nd most points allowed per game. I get the fact that they don't have Ayuk. It looks like both Juwan Jennings and Debo, they were kind of questionable coming into this week. Even Kittle was questionable too.
Yeah.
But I think that they're going to have to that whole team really. Jordan Mason's questionable too. So I think they just put everybody on the list. Yeah. But I do like Brock Purdy in this matchup against Dallas. They're going to have to put up quite a few points against Dallas. I think they're going to come out pass heavy. So I do like Brock Purdy. I like Jalen Hurts. Also, he's 9th in fantasy points right now, but versus Cincinnati. Cincinnati is 13th in most points allowed per game, 12th in most passing yards allowed per game, 11th in most total yards allowed per game. So a lot of yards, whether he's running the ball or whether he's throwing the ball. Hurts is going to have to put up big numbers to keep up with that Cincinnati offense, and he's got a great defensive matchup to go with that. And then another must start for me, Bo Nix. I don't know why I love this kid. I just do. I thought he was going to be something great right out of college, and he started off really slow. But Bo Nix is actually 12th right now for quarterbacks and fantasy points, which is really surprising.
His rushing is great.
Yeah, right. He's got that upside as well, and he's going against Carolina. Carolina giving up the 8th most passing yards per game, 3rd most total yards given up per game. So you get that running factor in there, like you just mentioned. And then they're giving up the most points per game as well. Not to mention that they got Bryce Young back at quarterback again. So you're going to kind of assume that they're going to be a lot of 3 and outs. That offense for Denver is going to be on the field quite a bit this week. My sits for this week, I don't like Anthony Richardson, but no shocker there. I never have liked Anthony Richardson. I know he gets you points on the ground. Versus Houston, though, who gives up the 4th fewest passing yards allowed per game. I wouldn't expect a whole lot through the air. Houston also gives up the 2nd fewest total yards allowed per game. So they've got a shutdown defense. I don't think Anthony Richardson is really ready for that in his young career.
And we spoke so much about how poor his passing metrics are.
Yeah, just not good at all. I've got Jaden Daniels or / Marcus Mariota. Whoever starts there, I'm not a big fan. I would love to see the Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, and I'm really kind of upset that Jaden Daniels is hurt with that rib issue. Yep. But Chicago's defense, Chicago, the other team coming off of a bye from last week, 4th fewest points given up per game, 7th fewest passing yards allowed per game. Coming off the bye is huge because they're damn near 100% healthy. They're rested, so they're going to be up for the Jaden Daniels test, and he's not even going to be 100% if he does end up playing. I'm not sure if you have the latest results on him, if he's in.
They pushed him hard today.
Yeah.
He practiced. They actually pushed him hard, but he's going to come down to a Sunday decision. So you'll know, they have the overnight stuff. Someone will come out around 10 o'clock and have an idea is expected to sit. And obviously your inactives are at 11:30 for the 1 o'clock game. But yeah, they pushed him today. So he's also with the rib. Obviously, if you have him, you're starting him.
Yep.
I mean, you just are. But that rib could get aggravated. He'll probably have some sort of flap jacket on or something like that. But I mean, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't on that one. Are you really going to sit him if you have him? In some leagues, he's my only quarterback. So
yeah, you could end up like
I'll have to just if he's there, I'm rolling with him.
You could end up like Puka Nacua owners.
Yeah, you had to start those guys last night.
Yeah.
I mean, you just did.
My other sit for the week, I've actually got him as my main starter in my other league here is Jared Goff. 10th in fantasy points, but I don't like him in this matchup against Tennessee for a couple of different reasons. Tennessee gives up the third fewest passing yards per game. They don't have DeAndre Hopkins anymore, which I think cannot be emphasized enough because they're not going to be scoring a lot, which means Detroit should be able to run the ball with their two really exceptional running backs. I don't see a lot of passing happening here, and that's why I don't think Jared Goff is a very smart play. I think he'll get you somewhere between 13, 15 points, but if you're needing that superstar, got to have 20 plus or whatever it is, I don't think he's going to get you the big points that you're looking for out of a quarterback.
We talked about this last week. We downgraded the Bills' passing weapons for the same reason.
Yep.
That's more of a run funnel defense, the Titans. So
yeah, same thing with Burrow from last week when I said I didn't like Burrow, and I was estimating a kind of the same thing, 13 to 15 points, and I think he ended up with 15.
Yeah,
which is great. But yeah, it's that same kind of aspect there.
Yeah, because you're going to get to your point. They would ride those two backs. Those two backs could both go off this week.
Yeah. As for my sleepers, one of them played last night with Matthew Stafford. He was currently 27th or was 27th before the week started in fantasy versus Minnesota, who gives up the third most passing yards allowed per game. And I thought at first, and I talked about this last night with Nick on the show, if anybody watched that one, it seemed like there was an audition. I can't imagine that the Rams are throwing in the towel, but I did hear trade rumors that Matthew Stafford was being linked to Minnesota, which I don't quite understand that one. Minnesota only, at the time, again, being first in the NFC North. And
I heard Cup to the Steelers, too. It was all over Twitter. But
there's a lot of
they're not going to give up. I mean, that division's wide open. There's no way. Why would they? I think they're sitting at, what are they sitting at, 3-4 or 4-4? I mean, they're right there.
3-4. Before the game last night, they were only 2 games out of first. It's not like, we're talking about the AFC East and we're talking about the Patriots and Buffalo, where, you got a 4-game deficit 8 weeks into the season. They're 2 games in, and none of the teams in their division are running away with it.
Seattle's no shoe-in to beat the Bills this week, even though I know it's in Seattle, so they could be 1 game out.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if Dallas beat San Fran. So you got that coming too.
No, absolutely not.
But Matthew Stafford was one of my sleepers. My other 2 who still are yet to play, I like Jordan Love this week. He's 14th in fantasy, so I can call him a sleeper. He's outside of the top 12 unless you're in a 16-man league. Versus Jacksonville, who gives up the second most passing yards allowed per game and the third most points allowed per game. That one's kind of a no-brainer for me. And then I also like Jameis Winston in Baltimore or against Baltimore. They're playing in Cleveland. Baltimore gives up the most passing yards allowed. They're also 10th in most total yards given up per game and 6th most points given up per game. So Jameis Winston, as we all know, he'll throw 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, but those 3 touchdowns will get you some points. They'll chuck it around.
Mm-hmm.
So there's my quarterback synopsis for the week. Let's go ahead and dive into halfbacks at this point. All right. My must starts. I tell you what, I usually go and I'll give you RB1, RB2. So Shawn, why don't you go ahead and take this one away too? And
because all right, so I'm going back in DFS. I love to go back to a play that everybody got mad at. He upset the masses. That was Dobbins. He was in a great spot last week, and I'm going back with him. I highlighted him and researching this game. Chargers are 0-3 when he fails to top 100 yards from scrimmage and 3-0 when he does. So I mean, Harbaugh. If I know that, Harbaugh has to know that. So I'm with him, and the Saints are 28th in points allowed to the running back position. My highlighted sit, he was a start for me last week. but he's got a really tough matchup this week. Pollard to go against Detroit. Detroit is second, and the Lions are second in points allowed to the running back position, and fifth in the league in yards allowed per rushing yards allowed per game. So overall, their rushing defense is excellent. I mean, Pollard is usually game script proof, but this is definitely a sit for me based on the matchups. And then a couple.
That's going to be a tough game
here.
for Tennessee
Yeah.
overall. Not to cut you off, but
Oh yeah, no,
that's just
it
going to be
is.
hard because you would assume automatically that they're just going to feed Pollard. But
Yes.
now if you're Detroit, you're focusing in on Pollard because you know that the passing game isn't there.
And that's the strong suit for them.
Yeah.
Running backs, I had Shawn Tucker as a flyer or a salary saver in DFS if Irvin was inactive, but it looks like he will be okay to go. So keep an eye on that regardless. Sometimes that changes. Love James Conner this week. He's in a real good spot. And then I just wrote up the Bills-Seattle game from a DFS perspective, and I love Kenneth Walker for a couple different reasons. If you're going to get after the Bills, it's going to be on the ground. Walker has been earning targets via the air. He's been outstanding the last few weeks. He even caught a touchdown pass last week. And then if Metcalf's out, they're going to lean on him even heavy. I don't see how they're saying he's not out yet. I just don't see how with that knee sprain he can play this week, Metcalf. So I love Walker this week. They're going to, at home, they would hang their head on him, to beat the Bills. Walker looked really good last week, and I'll pull it up here. He is running back. Sorry for the delay here. He is, what do I have Walker here? I'm missing. Oh, I'm sorry, RB8 overall, but he was even higher than that last week with well over 20 fantasy points.
Yeah.
Those are my my starts and sits for the running back position.
All right. So for me, I've got quite a few because I will break this down between running back 1 and running back 2. So must starts for running back 1. My first one is Bijan Robinson. Again, he's 6th in fantasy football, going up against Tampa Bay. Tampa gives up the 5th most points allowed per game, 2nd most total yards allowed per game. So I think Bijan, both on the ground and through the air, is going to he's going to have a big game there. Tampa Bay is in a little bit of a scramble mode without their wide receivers. Who knows what that offense is going to look like? Yep. They might fall behind now without having those passing weapons, which means more running room for Bijan throughout that game. Second one is Jordan Mason. I like Jordan Mason. He's 8th in fantasy right now, going up against Dallas, who gives up the 2nd most points allowed per game, 6th most rushing yards allowed per game, and the 9th most total yards allowed per game. So again, coming out of that backfield, if there is any kind of, Ayuk isn't there, what we talked about before, if Debo isn't 100%, Kittle isn't 100%, Jordan Mason isn't 100% either. So they're going to probably have to lean on everybody just a little bit more. I think Jordan Mason becomes the beneficiary there. And then my third one is Aaron Jones. Last night, he had a pretty decent game. He's 12th in fantasy versus the Rams. 3rd most rushing yards per game, 8th most points allowed per game. Jones is never out of the game. It doesn't matter if Vikings fall behind. He's always in the passing game.
Yep, he's game script proof, like we talked about with Pollard.
Yep, and did not expect for them to have both Puka and Cooper Kupp out there, so I thought there was going to be a little bit more running, but they did their best out there. Jones did have a pretty decent game if you had him in your lineup. For my running back 2s, I've got James Cook. He's actually 13th in fantasy football right now for running backs. I like him versus Seattle, who gives up the 5th most rushing yards allowed per game. And I like James Cook because he's healthy. Now that he's back into it, I think he's going to take the majority. He was splitting time last week, but I would look for James Cook to come back fully this week against Seattle. They're going to need him there. My second running back 2 is Joe Mixon. He is 16th in fantasy football. I like him versus Indianapolis, kind of for some of the things that we talked about before with Indy's offensive problems and the fact that Houston has a great defense. I think this is going to allow Joe Mixon to basically run the ball, and he's part of that passing game as well. 2nd most rushing yards. Indianapolis gives up the 2nd most rushing yards per game, 4th most total yards per game. And Mixon has back-to-back 25-plus point games. So I would not sit him at this point, not against Indianapolis. He looks healthy. He looks good. So I'd definitely stick him in there. And then my third RB2 is the guy that you mentioned before, J.K. Dobbins. He's actually 18th right now versus New Orleans. They give up a lot of rushing yards per game, a lot of points per game, the most total yards per game. So look for him. And they've got wide receiver issues at this point too. Lad McConkey, I think,
Yep.
is still questionable.
Didn't I see Disley on the report too, the injury report this week? I think that tight end, he did real well last week.
Yep. Quentin Johnson was on the injury report.
Yep.
I'm going to look him up real quick too.
Yeah, he's on there. They just, that's a run team, and that's why I was shocked last week. Like I said, I don't know how Dobbins, he just, it didn't pan out, and it's not like they were out of it, and he's somewhat game script proof anyways because he gets catches out of the backfield.
Yep. Johnson hasn't been updated, Quentin, since yesterday. Still remains sidelined yesterday.
Yeah, I haven't got anything come through yet on the Chargers, but it's only 12. It said 12:30 over there. So
yeah. My must sits for the week. I have Nick Chubb, who is 25th in fantasy as a fantasy running back last week. So if you think Nick Chubb is going to be the guy against Baltimore, who gives up the least rushing yards allowed per game. Plus, I'm going to guess that they're going to have to pass more with Jameis Winston in there. Jameis Winston not used to, he hasn't played a whole lot yet. He's usually one of those gunslingers that's going to get the ball down the field. Nick Chubb might be the stable back for the amount of points that Baltimore is putting up, though. I don't see them being able to run the ball all that often, especially with Baltimore's terrible pass defense. I think they're probably going to try to exploit that. My second one is going to be Devin Singletary, Tyrone Tracy, whoever. I think, Devin Singletary is healthy again. But versus Pittsburgh,
bad
this.
matchup. Yep.
Yeah, bad matchup.
Bad matchup.
Pittsburgh gives up the third fewest rushing yards allowed per game, eighth fewest total yards per game, second fewest points allowed per game. And we're talking about the Giants. So let's not forget that. And then my third sitter is Chuba Hubbard. And he's currently 10th in fantasy. You're probably going to end up starting him anyway, but versus Denver, who's allowed the third fewest points per game, 10th fewest rushing yards, third fewest total yards per game. Plus, they're, like I said before, they're putting Bryce Young back in there. So, boy, I just don't see this going very well for Carolina at all.
He putting him in there based on what you saw, he nukes all their skill position players.
Yeah, I mean, if it's me, I'm giving Chuba Hubbard probably 35 carry attempts, but he might only get about 75 yards out of it. So,
and one of the worst things in fantasy is having a running back on your roster on a bad offense. That's just because they get the game script can get them out. Like they can't turn around and hand it off. So passing is different. If you get a wide receiver on a bad offense, he can catch up in the second half. But a running back on a bad offense if they don't have the lead, you got to change your game plan.
Yep, exactly.
Unless they're a 3-down back, and not every team has that.
Yeah, I don't think Jonathan Brooks is back yet either. I think he's a wait and see for the next couple of weeks. So you don't have to worry about him.
9 or 10. I read today 9 or 10, week 9 or 10. So it's close.
Yeah, so you don't have to worry about Miles Sanders or anybody else cutting into his time. It's just the fact that they've got a very stout. I mean, Denver is one of the best defenses out there right now. They're just playing lights out. They're not giving up hardly anything. And against that offense, who doesn't seem to have the answers yet, they don't have Adam Thielen back yet. Deontay Johnson is out.
He's out. Just came up. He's inactive. He's already listed out.
So realistically, I mean, it's Xavier Legette and I don't know. I forgot his name. It's not Mims.
That Jatavian Sanders, the tight end, might be someone you could catch
but that's a game that's going to get away from Carolina real quick.
One other thing I forgot just to go at running backs to tell everybody, and people may or may not know this, but I had Kamara as more of a fade because we found out this week he's got a broken hand he's been playing with.
Right? Since like week 5 or something?
So, caution there, but if you can, go out there and grab Kendre Miller and stash him, especially if you're a Kamara owner, because they've been waiting to unleash this guy, and he's been on and off as far as he's just never been hope. Or healthy, I'm sorry. But go get Miller if you can, and one more hit on that hand and he could be out. So just buyer beware.
Yeah, and for the rest of that offense there, Derek Carr is listed as doubtful, so you're probably going to see Spencer Rattler again. Alvin Kamara does not have a designation at this point in time, but Chris Olave, and he also does not. Chris Olave, he's cleared to play as well. So
that helps. That helps. They're obviously big time.
Absolutely. My running back sleepers right now that I've got is I'm going with him again. He didn't put up great numbers last week, but Devon Achane is 26th in fantasy points overall. He's going against Arizona, 5th who is 5th in most total yards allowed per game, 7th in rushing yards allowed per game, 9th in most points allowed per game. So I like A-Chain to get off his butt on this one against Arizona, who has given up a lot of points over the last couple of games. Their offense hasn't seemed to get going at all. So I think that leaves A-Chain in that game quite a bit. Is Tua, are we talking about Tua? Is this guy coming back?
Yeah, he's back. He's a full go. So
yeah, so who knows what's going to happen?
I mean, if the and also H.N. gets a bump as well because Hill is still not practicing or something. Something's going on with him. He still hasn't practiced. They expect him to play, but he didn't practice again, I believe, today. So keep an eye on him for a possible late Sunday inactive, which gives him and Waddle a bump because H.N.'s a receiver.
Yep, Tyreek Hill has a foot issue, not spotted during Friday's practice, so that's not good. And then Jalen Waddle, actually, too, is listed as questionable a day ago with a quad. He remains limited in practice, so they might be running the ball quite a bit. So keep your eyes on A-Chain there. My second sleeper is Javonte Williams. He's currently 29th in fantasy for Denver, going against that Carolina team, and I think we've beaten that one up. They've given up the most rushing yards, most points per game, all that fun stuff. I think this is if you've got Javonte, you gotta play him.
Game script should be real good in his favor. They're a favorite. So
and then I actually do like Rachaad White as well, and he's 30th in fantasy right now versus Atlanta, who's 11th with most points allowed, 9th in rushing yards allowed. I think Tampa Bay is going to need to rely on the run game, and let's keep in mind that Rachaad White can also catch out of the backfield. That's how he got his 2 touchdowns last week. Was on receptions. So even if he is splitting time in that backfield, he's still going to get his touches, especially now with both Godwin and Evans being out. So he's a sleeper for me as well.
Yep, like him a lot too. I mean, they're passing. They have 2 really good backs that can catch it out of the backfield there.
All right, so we've got a question from Aiden here. Let's go ahead and take this. Hey guys, can I get a trade advice analysis? Not sure if this is a program for that. Absolutely is. So the trade advice or the trade analysis here, I have Jefferson, Devonta Smith, Olave, Jacoby Myers as my wide receivers. My running back is pretty set as well. The trade is to trade away Olave and Devonta Smith for McLaurin and Jameson Williams.
That's kind of a tough. I mean, well, you got to remember, Jameson's not appealing, so he's sitting 2 games. So you don't have him for 3 games. And then he was going to get Jameson and who else? Olave?
And McLaurin
and giving up
for Olave and Devonta Smith. And here's what I'll say about Devonta Smith. Here's my plug for him. Go look up his schedule for the rest of the year. Him and AJ Brown, they should be tearing things up the back half of this year. They've got nothing but green in front of them. So right now, Devonta Smith is actually on my bench. I have better players right now than Devonta Smith at wide receiver. But believe me, when I was looking for trades in the beginning of this week, when I was going through my wide receivers, he's got the biggest green light from like week 10 on. So you wouldn't get Devonta Smith from me without a lot. But I like McLaurin in there. Olave, you just don't know what's going to happen with him.
So he's one to get. I'm not. So wait, I'm sorry to ask you again. So who is he getting again?
So the trade would be he would trade away Olave and Devonta Smith.
Okay.
And he would be getting McLaurin and Jameson Williams.
Oh, yeah, that's an absolute no for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Olave is going to get most of the passes there with Rashid Shaheed out for the entirety of the year. The only question there is who's going to be the quarterback. And it sounds like if it's not Carr this week, it'll be Carr next week.
Yeah.
And he'll be targeting Olave, so he'll get plenty of targets. And again, with Devonta Smith, I like his target percentage going down the stretch here. McLaurin, I've got him. He had a slow start to the beginning of the year. Now he's getting used to Jaden McDaniels. Who knows how that's going to work out with Mariota going forward. Obviously, it's a minor injury with the rib for Jaden Daniels. But, I don't like the Jameson Williams there.
If you make that trade, you could potentially not – well, you can't use Williams this week. And if Daniels doesn't start, okay, you start McLaurin. But it's an obvious downgrade. So that, for me, that's a no.
Ditto. Yep, I don't like that trade, but
no.
I guess it depends on what it's wide receiver for wide receiver. Your running backs are set, but I would stick with Olave and Devonta Smith. I think that's going to be the better 1-2 punch.
Yeah, I think might just be overthinking it a little bit too much. I think he's in good shape, it happens, but he's in good shape.
All right, let's get to wide receivers. Since we're talking about wide receivers, why don't you go ahead?
All right. For me, I highlighted my highlighted start in my DFS article for receivers is I did a salary saver on this one but I like Dontavian Wicks this week. He's risky in DFS, but with his salary, he does lead all Packer wideouts with 4 touchdowns and is tied for the team lead in targets. He comes at a great salary. And the only thing holding him back, I looked this up, is he only hit his 36.8% catch rate, which is weird because he has a good quarterback. So I highlighted him as a start as more of a sleeper for the wideouts because I talked about this. I'm not going to just sit here and write an article and give everybody chalk. So I try to save them some salary at receiver. I like Wicks. He's obviously a wide receiver 3, but there's upside with him because he could go off. He's the deep threat capability guy there. My highlighted sit is no longer a big deal because he just got declared out as Deontay Johnson. But with Bryce Young going in there, you could put any Panther receiver in there. And then a couple more starts at wide receiver. Jaden Reed, I like him a lot. Obviously, tied to a good quarterback. Like Garrett Wilson, I thought he actually benefited really well from having Adams out there, and I just think he's taken off. I have him in a lot of teams, but I think he's starting to hit his stride a little bit. He's done real well the last 3 weeks, and I have a couple sixths. Do not like Josh Downs and Richardson starting. So to me, I'm out on every Colts wide receiver, but I highlighted Josh Downs and Quentin Johnson. You had mentioned him. He's somewhat injured, but he started out like a house of cards, and then he just hasn't done anything, which is kind of weird. I thought he was about to take off, but those are my highlighted starts and sits at the wideout position for this week.
All right. So here's an interesting question that we've got from Xenon. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Mm-hmm. Would you sell high on Kyren and Cup or hold? So I wouldn't sell high on Kyren. My answer for both of them is no. I wouldn't sell either one of these guys at this point. Kyren Williams is going to continue to be the workout horse. He'll finish as a top 6 running back this year. I wouldn't sell high on Cup either.
Nope.
Because really, whether he stays with the Rams or if they trade him to a wide receiver needy team, he's going to be targeted a lot. Mm-hmm. So I would not, but I'll take if you've got.
Nope. All I'll add to that is go get Blake Corum. Make sure you have Blake Corum. When William tweaked his ankle a tad on one play early in the game, he went over and got wrapped up, and Corum was right in there. So he got the ball right away. He also made a heck of a block in pass pro on a nice completion when he was in there, which is crucial for young running backs. To get on the field. You got a pass pro. He picked up a free rusher. So I would go get him and keep those two, just like you said. Go handcuff, especially this late in the year, go handcuff Williams because the back in that offense, is huge.
Okay, so Xenon added to it. He said, what if I could get CeeDee Lamb and Saquon in that trade if possible? The trade would be he thinks he can give up Kyren and Cup, and he would give up Evan Ingram for Saquon and CeeDee.
Well, this is a little different now. I mean,
I think that's an upgrade for both of them.
Yeah,
I would take Saquon over.
If you can get Saquon and CeeDee for, absolutely, I would do that trade. But that at first I wasn't, we weren't aware of that.
Yeah, and here's the thing: if you've got both, obviously you do. You've got Kyren and Cup, and we've talked about this before, Shawn. That's a pairing on a team that we don't really care for. I don't like having a wide receiver and a running back.
It's a negative correlation. Statistically, it's a negative correlation running back, wide receiver. I mistakenly got in that in the league and I've done this. I got Pickens and Harris, and it is what it is. But that, it's a positive correlation with quarterback, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, but negative with running back, wide receiver in relation to fantasy points.
Yeah, you're giving up a number 1 running back and a number 1 wide receiver for a better number 1 running back and a better number 1 wide receiver that are on different teams. So you can double up your points there. The kicker is you give up Evan Ingram. Okay, I get it. He's had the most targets last year. He's going to get a bunch of targets in Jacksonville. Depending on what you can get right now, and even if it's free agents out there, Jonnu Smith is probably available. First one that kind of comes to mind. If you can, or if you have a backup tight end in mind and you can afford to give up Ingram, I would absolutely make that trade. And he says another one could be A-Chain, Cup, and Ingram for CD and Saquon. Full PPR, 5-2 record. I would still do that because, again, I like Saquon over A-Chain. I like CD over Cup. So there's no hesitation. For
that's a fine. You're doing well in that trade. You're not good. You're not getting worse. So at worst, I mean, we all know that I will say this just to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say CD in some cases, this, you and I are in multiple leagues. He went off the board as not the wide receiver 1, but the 1 overall.
Yeah.
Okay. And just for reference, he's wide receiver 16 right now. Looks disinterested at times in that offense. So we know when Cup's healthy, he's a machine. He's humming. Now Puka's good too, but Cup, just to keep that out there, I think Saquon and Williams is somewhat of a wash. The only thing I would say, I have Saquon a lot, but there's no handcuff to him. I know if you have Williams and you get Corum, and God forbid something happens to Williams, you got Corum, you're still set with a locked and loaded RB1. So just to play the other side, I guess it would depend if you're 2-5 and you want to shake things up, but if you're 5-2 or 6-1, maybe you just stay with you because obviously you've got a good balance there with your team.
Yeah, and I'll throw this out too, not to play devil's advocate, but if you've got Cup, what does Cup have on his team also? Obviously, we mentioned Puka Nacua, but he's got Kyron Williams on there. They have a lot of weapons on the Rams. The Cowboys do not. No. If you think Rico Williams is a solid weapon, okay. Who's their number 2 right now? Is it Tolbert?
You can't key on one player, though. So, right. You can't double Cup with Puka there. That's the good thing, right? I mean, no, you're absolutely right.
So you're going to get a bunch more targets, I would think, with a CeeDee Lamb, who has been healthy for the majority of his career, where Cup has not. I think you take a little bit more of a risk with Cup over CeeDee Lamb. So just more reasons to go that way. Hey, Xenon, thanks for the questions, though. Appreciate it. Go ahead and follow us, please. Stuff is right down here at the bottom.
Yep.
Give us a like and a follow. Appreciate you with your questions, and share this and all that fun stuff as well. Shawn, now that we got on that big old rant there about wide receivers, I think you were done with your wide receivers.
Yeah, I'm all set. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to get into my wide receivers here real quick. My wide receiver 1s that I like the most this week, I like Drake London probably the most. He's 3rd right now on fantasy points going against Tampa Bay. I mentioned Bijan earlier, but Tampa Bay gives up the 4th most passing yards allowed per game, the 2nd most total yards allowed per game, and 5th in points allowed per game. So I like Drake London here. I think that Atlanta is not going to hesitate in running up the score against the division rival, and I think Drake London becomes the beneficiary there. Shawn, you mentioned Jaden Reed. Love Jaden Reed. He's 5th in fantasy right now versus Jacksonville, who gives up the 2nd most passing yards allowed per game, 3rd most points allowed per game. Love Jaden Reed. And I love, here might be a tricky one. I still love Garrett Wilson. So Garrett Wilson is
I highlight him. Love him.
Yeah, he's 11th right now in fantasy, and just because they ended up getting Devontae Adams over there, if you noticed in the last game, they still got the same amount of targets in their first game together. The only difference was Garrett caught his. Exactly. So Garrett Wilson against New England, who's 9th in passing yards allowed per game, 10th in points given up per game. I like that matchup still with Garrett Wilson. I think Adams is there to basically draw coverage, and it frees up Garrett Wilson from maybe some double coverage situations. Wide receiver 2, we mentioned CeeDee Lamb. Love CeeDee Lamb. He's 16th overall in fantasy versus San Fran this week. Dallas is coming off the bye.
I like Prescott a lot. So if I like,
and you mentioned he had Prescott in one of yours. So I like Juwan Jennings. He's 18th in fantasy versus Dallas. I think Debo might get a little bit more coverage there. So they're going to free up Juwan Jennings, and he's been electric when he's had the opportunity to play. When Ayuk was out, Dallas gives up the 2nd most points allowed per game. They're 9th in total yards allowed per game. So he's going to get his. And then I also like T. Higgins, who's 23rd overall in fantasy versus Philadelphia this week. I like that Cincinnati-Philadelphia matchup. I think it's going to be a very high-scoring game. I'm not sure what the over-under is, but I can't imagine it's less than maybe 48. So everybody in Cincinnati and Philadelphia.
It is 48. That's exactly what it is, 47, 48.
My sitters for the week, and I wrote this up before, so, Scout's honor here. I had Deontay Johnson, even if he was healthy. 20th in fantasy, but he's not playing this week, so we don't
Nope.
really get to go into that. I don't like any wide receivers. I'll just put it that way. If you want to substitute Leggett in there or whoever else, don't take any Carolina receivers. They got Bryce Young throwing the ball right now. They're going up against a stellar defense in Denver. It's not going to be a good day for them. I would also say sit Wan'Dale Robinson at this point. He's 27th in fantasy right now. He's going up against Pittsburgh. We talked about how good Pittsburgh's defense was before. And then on top of that, you've got your rookie Malik Neighbors out there kind of calling out the play calling a little bit last week in the locker room. You better believe that they want to keep him happy. He's going to get a lot more looks. There was probably a conversation there that happened with Daniel Jones.
Huge target hound he is.
Yeah, so you better get him the ball. My third sit of the week, this one might be surprising, but it's really not. If you look at the trends of what's going on in Arizona right now, I don't like Marvin Harrison Jr. this week. He's 28th in fantasy. He's going up against Miami, who gives up the least passing yards allowed per game and the fourth least total yards allowed. So I don't think he's going to do much this week. And
he's probably going to draw Jalen Ramsey too.
Yeah. Yep. So I'm not a fan of those. If you're looking for somebody to replace a couple of those guys, here's some good ones for you. I've got 5 sleepers for you, and these are some really, really good key sleepers. Number 1, Tyreek Hill. If you want to go after him, he's 43rd in fantasy. So yes, he is considered a sleeper. I like him against Arizona. They gave up the 7th most passing yards per game, 9th most points per game. I feel like all you got to do is get the ball in the hands of Hill. So whether it's a dump off pass for 5 yards, we all know that he's got the speed. He's the cheetah. He's got to break out sometime. Other teams are breaking out against that Arizona defense. I like Tyreek Hill here. Lad McConkey, if he plays, or Quentin Johnson, if one of them is out and the other one plays, I do like that matchup versus New Orleans. I know that they're a run first, but if one of those guys is out, you're going to have to pass it to the other one. They're going to get in passing down situations. Somebody's going to get some targets between those two guys. So keep your eye on that one. I also like Cortland Sutton. He's 46th overall in fantasy versus Carolina. Again, Carolina is not going to be putting up a lot of points, but I like Cortland Sutton in this situation. They haven't been able to stop anybody in Carolina. They give up the 3rd most total yards allowed per game and the most points given up per game in Carolina. So if they are throwing the ball, I think Cortland Sutton is your main guy there. Not to say that Troy Franklin won't get his catches in Denver as well, but I do like that matchup. A couple more. I've got Jerry Jeudy, 56th overall in fantasy. He might even be a free agent in whatever your league is versus Baltimore, who gives up the most passing yards per game. I also like Kelvin Ridley this week if he plays. 67th. Can you imagine that? 67th in fantasy. If you look at him, it's like, man, this guy sucks. But I know people have him on his bench because he's owned in over 80% of leagues. Versus Detroit, they're going to have to pass the ball. He's going to get targets. There's no more D-Hop. He's going to have to get targets. I feel like this could be a breakaway sleeper game for Calvin Ridley.
A couple more wide receiver updates for our viewers. T. Higgins is listed as questionable with a quad on Sunday. He was limited, but to monitor that. And Jawan Jennings is actually downgraded to doubtful.
Wow.
So, that I think Debo's playing anyways because he has limited practice. So that's just a couple updates for that's. If that's the case, then it could be a Ricky Pearsall. Regardless of whether Samuel plays or not, Pearsall is going to get some targets. He might be out there opposite. He's going to be out there.
Yeah, I think he's the only healthy wide receiver that
he's
San
out
Fran has
there regardless. Yeah, he's out there regardless for sure.
Ayuk on the IR. Chris Conley is questionable. Debo questionable. Juwan questionable. Kittle questionable. Jeez, that whole team.
Kittle's been staying on there with the foot, so that's normal. But he's been playing, so.
Yeah, go get yourself a little Ricky Pearsall this week if you can. He might get some carries for you or some touches. He probably will against Dallas. They're going to have to throw it to somebody.
Yep, absolutely. I'm just checking more updates here for our viewers.
All right, Xenon, is it possible to do a 1-for-1 Kyron for Henry? Good luck getting anybody for Henry, Derrick Henry at this point. I offered my whole roster to a team for Derrick Henry, and they said no.
I don't think anybody's giving him up. I mean, Kyron's good, but I mean, you could offer it. I mean, they might accept it.
If you've got somebody who doesn't know, or maybe they think he's peaked. Who knows? Or maybe they're looking at Keaton Mitchell coming back, and they think that Keaton Mitchell's actually going to cut into his time, which I don't think that's going to happen either.
No, he's. I looked at his stats today. when I was doing the fantasy, and I didn't I mean, I knew he was good. I just didn't realize how well his stats are, like his rushing stats. Henry's.
Yeah, he's got almost 900 rushing yards this year. He's on pace to break that rushing record in a single season this year. I think the closer that they get to that, or if they keep that in line, they're going to keep feeding him the ball.
That was a perfect
because they
marriage.
want that record.
Perfect marriage, him going there.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Kyron and AJ Brown for Henry and Jamar. I don't think you're getting Henry, so I don't think that this one even matters.
And you don't want to overspend. I mean, you're giving up. You're getting weaker at another position, but you're getting stronger. So I don't know how much that makes you.
Yeah, and I tell you what, is this a fair enough trade to be made? There is no fairness in trades. You make your trades. If you think that you're getting a deal, maybe somebody else is getting a deal. I made 2 trades earlier this week. Just Wednesday or yesterday, in fact. I'm trying to get a backup. Looking at, and we mentioned Goff before. Goff's season at the back end here is very difficult.
Yeah.
So for the amount of points that he's putting up early on in this season, if you don't have a backup plan for Jared Goff, you better get one real quick. The guys that I was looking at for that, looking at the rest of the season, I was looking at Baker Mayfield. Number one, I get that he doesn't have his wide receivers in there, but Baker Mayfield, they got an easy passing schedule coming up on the back half of their season. And then Dak Prescott has a very easy schedule coming up on the back half of his season as well. So
and Goff, check and see where those games are too. If they're outside, he's a completely different quarterback for whatever reason.
Yeah, so look out for those. So no trade is an unrealistic trade because I think I offered, and you might think it's unfair, but I offered up Bo Nix and somebody else. I think it was a wide receiver that I had on the bench for each one of those quarterbacks and one of their more inferior wide receivers, just to make it seem more plausible. But for both of those teams, Mayfield and Prescott were the backup quarterbacks on those teams. Okay. So they might be willing to give up on their backup if they can upgrade at wide receiver or upgrade at a different position. So is it fair enough? Hey, fairness, it's like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. What looks bad to you might look good to someone else.
Very true.
All right, my man, let's get into the tight ends.
All right, you want me to keep rolling?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. All right, tight ends. I did not highlight any tight ends in the start, but we have our usual. I do like, obviously, I like Bowers, goes without saying, but I've got 2 that might not be on the radar, but I like Cade Otton, and we talked about him Tuesday. I like him this week. He's already been a factor in the passing game for the Bucs, but they're obviously in trouble at wide receiver. So I think he's about to have a real good week. And I like Kincaid this week against Seattle. Dalton Kincaid. Seattle, that's one area where they're very weak. They're among some of the worst in the league and covering the tight end. Kincaid still has a good share, target share. And with Cooper, obviously, going to get more usage. Snap rate will go up this week. Coleman had his best game last week, so that takes some of the heat off of him in the middle. And Kincaid was targeted at least 2 times. I know of in the red zone last week they didn't catch him, but I think this could be the week where he blows up, so to speak. And he is, I hope, because I did the individual write up on the Bills Seahawks game actually about an hour before you and I finalized it before we went on the air. And its position is not the greatest, as we know, but Kincaid is right on the fringe. He's tight end 13, so he's right there in the tight end 1 conversation. So he has a really nice 11.2 yards per catch. It's just a matter of him getting a touchdown. He's due, and at the price he is in DFS. If he gets a touchdown, he'll blow over the 2x salary that you like to target. So those are my 2 sits for tight end. I didn't really have a ton here, but I do not care. I don't know. I have one here for you. I'm not sure. I like Jonnu Smith. I think he's so. I mean, didn't want to chase the points on him. Another one I'm basically done with, I think, now. I thought maybe he would be a sleeper tight end, but with the new receiver in town, Adams, I'm sitting Tyler Conklin.
Yeah, fair enough. Some injury updates as far as the tight ends go. Kittle looks like he is still questionable, so that's up to date. Still questionable with a foot, limited practice. You've got Dallas Goedert, who looks like he is not going to be playing this weekend. He was not at practice today, so it looks like he's going to be out. And then we talked about Will Dissly before. Dissly remains sidelined as well, so keep your eye on that. Those are your top 25 tight ends, I guess, as far as fantasy goes. Tight ends. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Boy, one more. Metcalf just got listed. DK Metcalf is now listed as doubtful. So just to throw on that, JSN looks like a good one for Seattle this week. So I actually put him in the article and the Bills Seahawks because it predicated on no Metcalf. Fire up your JSN.
All right.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead with your.
No, you're fine. I was just looking at. I got another update. Looks like Zay Flowers has been upgraded. He did not practice yesterday, but he did practice limited today, so he's questionable as well for the Ravens. So if anybody's got Zay Flowers in there against Cleveland, that might not be a bad matchup either. But at this point in time, it's kind of funny. It's Zay Flowers and then Bateman in the wide receiver order here. I don't know what their numbers are. What do you want, 26 and 27 overall or something like that?
Yeah,
but Bateman, after having a big week, I think they've got design plays for him now where they know what he can do. He's getting smarter as a route runner. Excuse me. But back to the tight ends here. My tight ends, obviously, I mean, I'm gonna keep banging this drum too. It's Brock Bowers all day long for me. I don't know how you could not say Brock Bowers at this point in time. Going against Kansas City this week, I think he has another big week. He's second in fantasy football overall for tight ends. I like Tucker Kraft again this week. He's third in fantasy, going up against Jacksonville.
Good one, yep.
And then I like Kyle Pitts. He's sixth overall in fantasy. So it's not like you're not going to start these guys, but I think those three have the most amount of potential to put up the biggest points. My sitters for this week, I think you can sit Isaiah Likely if you haven't already for the last couple of weeks. Isaiah is still 8th in fantasy football points, but I think Mark Andrews is right behind him now. He's taking kind of a backseat to Andrews. Obviously, Mark had 2 touchdown passes last week. So I think we're back to normal in Baltimore there. Number 2, I don't like Sam Laporta this week. He's 20th in fantasy, which is a shocker because Laporta was one of the top 3 tight ends that was flying off the board.
You overdrafted him unfortunately, because he's not paying off. It's funny you say that because I did the Lions game. I almost put him as a sit, and people were like, "Oh, he's crazy," but he's not paying off where you drafted him. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, definitely not. I couldn't imagine. I was watching the game last week, the Vikings-Lions game, and I just couldn't imagine how few times. Yeah, I think they only targeted him maybe 4 times in that game. I mean, it was really low. But he's 20th in fantasy points going against Tennessee. It's not going to get any better for him going to Tennessee. I think, as I mentioned before, that's going to become a running game for the Lions. They're going to do even less passing. My third guy, and maybe you disagree with me, I don't like Pat Freiermuth this week. Although he is 11th in fantasy, so he's probably somebody's starter versus the Giants. Pat's only seen 3 targets in each of his last 3 games. So he's just not getting the volume there. Thought maybe that would change last week with Russell Wilson. I guess we're on a wait and see. Maybe keep him on your bench if you've got a better option at this point. My sleepers, I actually do like Jonnu Smith. He's 15th in fantasy right now, going up against Arizona. I do like him. I've got Cade Otton as well. He's 13th in fantasy.
I love Otton this week,
Yeah, so he's a good one. I like Travis Kelce. He's 14th in fantasy this week. Now that they've got D-Hop, maybe it takes a little bit more off of Travis Kelce. Maybe he gets open more. Maybe they open it up for him.
And D-Hop is playing.
Yeah. My 4th sleeper and last is David Njoku. He's currently, obviously, he was out at the beginning of the year, but 21st in fantasy, going up against Baltimore. They give up a boatload of passing yards. So don't overlook Njoku if he's still available for you. Go get him.
And that sounds even better because I just saw that Marlon Humphrey is doubtful.
Yeah, Marlo hurt his knee. However, they did get Jalen Armour-Smith back. They got another cornerback that's going to be playing this week. They got Arthur Millette back. You know him.
Yeah, former Steeler. Slot corner. Yeah, does a good job. He's a decent secondary. He's very competent.
Yep. So they'll start Nate Wiggins and Brandon Stevens at the corners this week. No Marlowe. So, the wide receiver. I'm glad that I picked up Tillman off the waivers because he might be something good behind Jerry Jeudy. I mentioned him before. I like him. I do also like Tillman. I think he got like 12 targets last week.
Yes.
So he's going to get fed too. I like that
think he
whole
finished as
passing team right now in
Yeah, he
Cleveland.
finished as a wide receiver 1, if not a wide receiver 2 last week. Tillman was definitely a
Yeah.
hot pickup on waivers.
Quick question by Aiden, and we got to him a little bit earlier. He says, I know you guys said that Olave Devonta Smith trade was bad. If I added Ramondre Stevenson, and went for Neighbors instead, would that be pretty solid?
Who did you get back? Neighbors?
So if I added Ramondre and then went for Neighbors instead, well, I like Neighbors more than Olave.
I mean, you also have to give something to get something. So if you need to upgrade it, well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with getting Neighbors. For advice, we just don't want people to give up too much. Yeah, you might get the best player in the thing. Just make sure you're not weakening your overall team.
Yeah, and what happens if you're trading 3 guys there for 1 guy, and that 1 guy who just had a concussion ends up getting another concussion?
Yeah, and
you
now
just
you
screwed
got to
yourself
go
out of
find
3 players.
You also
gotta
need
look
to
at it
go
that
find
way.
2 more roster spots too. So it also depends on what's out there in waivers.
Exactly, depending on what's out there. If
3
you've
for
got some
1 is a
people out
lot.
there. Yeah, I mean, if you can go out there, like I mentioned before, Troy Franklin's probably out there yet.
Yeah.
He's number 2 right now. He's the number 2 in Denver. And who was it that just got shot? Or got shot Friday? The Denver Broncos wide receiver. He was on the IR.
Oh, I didn't hear. I did not see.
He got shot twice. Josh Reynolds is on the IR.
Oh, Reynolds, yeah, the guy from the Lions. I did not know he was hurt. I did not see that he got that. Yeah.
Yeah, the Broncos announced yesterday that Reynolds was the victim of a shooting in Denver on October 18th, and it just came out the other day. He received treatment for minor injuries, but he's on the IR. And the only reason why I bring that up is because that leaves you've got Cortland Sutton, Troy Franklin, and then Devon Vele.
Yeah.
Or Vele.
I love Franklin too. We talked about him Tuesday. So.
Yep, and Troy Franklin. Last time I checked, I'm just waiting for somebody to make a move or to find out more about one of my guys this week. But 6 targets last week, had 5 catches, 50 yards, and that's just kind of the beginning, I think, for him.
Yes, absolutely.
Tank Bigsby instead of Ramondre. Tank Bigsby is going to be a part of that defense. I wouldn't give up Tank just yet. I know Stevenson is the lead back.
I'm actually starting him, Bigsby, this week. So.
Yeah. So it would be Olave, Devontae Smith, and Ramondre for Neighbors and Jamison Williams.
No,
I don't like that
much
trade.
because Williams right now, he's a thrower and you're not getting anything with him. He's suspended for 2 games and he's let's say this, he's 5th in the pecking order in that team, correct?
Yeah.
With the 2 running backs, the tight end, and obviously St. Brown, he's 5th in the pecking order. So you can't I can't sit here and say Williams is an every week starter because he's not.
Yeah. No, he's not. He's had a couple of very, very big weeks, but he's not a solid number 2.
He's a bye-week starter at best.
Higgins or anything like that.
Yeah, he's a bye-week starter at best. I wouldn't do that. I mean, yeah, Neighbors is good, but you're giving up so much.
All right, Chivalry King. Should I trade Amari Cooper and Ramondre Stevenson for David Montgomery and Jaden Reed? Absolutely.
Yeah, go hit accept.
Yeah, if they're offering you that trade, I would click on that before he has time to think twice about it. Yeah, Amari Cooper and Ramondre Stevenson for David Montgomery. Yeah, that's a take that bag and run away quickly type of a trade. Yeah. If you guys haven't already, I know I mentioned before, go ahead and, we're everywhere, me and Shawn. Check us out, follow, all that kind of stuff. We do these generally on Fridays at about the same time from 2 p.m. Central to 3 p.m. Central-ish a little bit. So the more questions you have, you can always hit me up on X is my favorite here. I'll get a bunch of people that ask me questions. I love the responses that I'm getting from some people too that have helped out week over week where, now they call me bro. They're like, yo, bro, I need some help on this one. It's like, all right, cool.
That's great.
So,
yeah.
All right. So the last thing that we got to go over here is defenses. And I'll take this one real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. I only have just 1 or 2.
Compliment to you. I like Pittsburgh this week versus the Giants. I think Pittsburgh gets another win this week. This division is going to be tough, man. I don't know how we're going to stay friends over this.
Yeah, it's going down to the wire.
Pittsburgh is 5th in fantasy right now, going against the Giants, who scored the 2nd fewest points per game. So I don't know how you could not like that one. Denver, we mentioned them before. They're 2nd in fantasy points right now, going up against Carolina, who's starting Bryce Young again. And then I do like Detroit's defense as well. They're 9th in fantasy versus Tennessee, who just got rid of D-Hop. They're scoring the 7th fewest points per game overall as well. If you're looking for a sleeper team, I'm going to give you a couple there. I like Houston. Houston is technically 13th overall in fantasy versus Indianapolis. Do not like AR at quarterback there. So I know that they got Jonathan Taylor back.
Yeah, he is back. Yes, he is.
But Houston has a better run defense as well. So they're probably going to focus on that, make AR pass the ball. I also like the Jets defense this week against New England. They give up the second fewest points per game. They got Hassan Riddick back as well.
Yes,
I don't know how much he's going to play, but he will be there. And I think that is a serious upgrade to that New York Jets defense. Do not sleep on that one. And then I like Kansas City versus the Las Vegas Raiders there, just because the Raiders are terrible. They got quarterback issues.
Yes,
they just signed Desmond Ridder. They're absolutely garbage. And my super sleeper on the week, if you're looking for a reach, Arizona is the 23rd best ranked defense in fantasy football right now, but they're going against Miami, who has scored the fewest points per game. You might get something out of Arizona if you're in a pinch. My sitters are, I don't like Buffalo, even though they're ranked number 7 in fantasy right now. Don't like Buffalo against Seattle, even with the news that DK Metcalf is not going to be playing. I still think Seattle puts up a lot of points, the 8th most points per game, as a matter of fact. And on the other side, I don't like Seattle's defense. I think that's going to be a very high-scoring game. Seattle is 10th in fantasy right now, but they're going against Buffalo, who scores the 5th most points per game. And I also don't like Cleveland. Cleveland, obviously, against Baltimore, they score the most points. Cleveland is the 12th, so they might be in your starting lineup, but I would look for one of those sleeper teams. And I know I just took like half of the defense.
Oh, you're good. I have 2 real quick ones. I actually like your Ravens because they're a big favorite. I'm going to go off the spread. I like to find the favorite teams.
Oh, yeah.
So Baltimore is a big favorite. You know, I like that because that game script should dictate they can just go right after the passer. And we know that Winston's turnover prone. And another big spread one. I have this team everywhere. I've talked about this with you last week and Tuesday. I like the Chargers, 7-point favorite at home against the Saints with another week of Rattler. Those are my 2. You spoke about the Texans. I like that one. Anytime you're facing Richardson, you're in good shape. I do think the Colts, though, will play well this week. They're in a revenge spot. I actually like them this week, on the spread line because it's a revenge game, divisional game. They lost to them. So I actually do like the Colts this week. But those 2, I like Chargers and Ravens a lot. And then you touched on the ones that we don't like. I'm just, that Buffalo-Seattle could be high scoring. I don't like that. And then the Bengals and Eagles for me to stay away just because I think it's going to be a high scoring game.
Yeah. So you're going to find yourself cheering for the Browns this week?
I don't know. I don't know. But I mean, they're a mess. I don't even know if I had to root against them.
Yeah.
I think they can handle it themselves. So.
Oh, man. This is going to be fun. I got to tell you, I'm seeing a Pittsburgh and Baltimore both going to the playoffs again this year. It's certainly looking like that.
And they got 2 games against each other yet. So
yeah, we haven't even really gotten to thick of it yet. I think this is we beat Cincinnati once already this year, but we haven't played you guys yet. And this is our first game.
I don't think the Steelers have even played a division game yet. I'm thinking. I don't think they have.
Yeah.
Weird scheduling.
Right. They always do this with the AFC North, though. We always end up playing Cincinnati with the last game, or you guys with the last game, or something.
I know. They're always playing around.
Makes it a little exciting.
Yep.
Well, hey, I know you got things to do, and it's
I got to head out to my next appointment here back to work. So I will see you soon. Have a great weekend, and thank you as always for having me on.
Hey, not a problem, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Later.
Yep.